Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to the first This.JavaScript of 2018. Very excited to have a bunch of amazing people on the call. We are going to be doing a state of frameworks and libraries today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly and tell y'all everything about what we're doing. So can everybody see that? Hopefully. Okay, so today we are going to have a few awesome people. We're going to have Ricardo Mendes, who is on the Ember core team, Igor Minar, who is on the Angular core team, Evan Yu, Vue core team and author of VueJS, Justin Fagnani, Polymer core team, Franziska, who's on the Node.js technical steering committee, Ben Lesh, author of RxJS 5 and up, also on the core team, Michael Jackson, author of React Router and founder of React Training, and then myself and Rachel. Rachel is our special invited guest. She from W3C and also the author of Animations at Work. Is that what it's called, Rachel? I'm sorry, I don't have slide notes. But anyways,
yes, that is what it is called. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. I wanted to make sure I got that right. Could not do this without my team at This.Labs helping me organize this, as well as allow me to do all the awesome things related to bringing JavaScript people together. So if you ever need help with mentoring, consulting, training, et cetera, feel free to reach out to us. We work with a lot of amazing people and core contributors from different frameworks and libraries. We also really believe in supporting women in tech, so we are currently piloting this new apprentice and mentor program. If you are a female in tech and you would like help in any way, maybe you've completed a boot camp or anything like that, you can go ahead and email me, Tracy at this.co. Or if you're also interested in mentoring, this is a great opportunity. Companies as well, if you're trying to hire for females and really want to increase the diversity, we have a lot of really good opinions and ideas related to how to do this, as well as we have a long list of women that you can hire. So please let us know. We're really passionate about this project. Upcoming events, on March 29th, we'll be doing the State of WebAssembly, which is going to be led by Jay Phelps and myself. Some of the people that will be there, for example, would be Luke Wagner from Mozilla, who's worked on WebAssembly, and a bunch of other amazing people, including some folks from, I know Deepti as well from Google will be there as well. May 17th is Global Accessibility Day, so we'll be doing a State of Accessibility, so tune in on that. You can find all the details at this.co/JavaScript for all our upcoming events and previous events if you want to check those out as well. With that being said, I wanted to go ahead and turn it back over. Go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I will go ahead and turn it over to Franziska, who's going to give us an update on the Node.
Thanks, Tracy. So excited to be here and I get to talk about Node. So I'm Franziska Hinkelmann. My handle is fhinkel on GitHub and Twitter, and I'm on the Node.js Technical Steering Committee, the TSC, and I'm also a Node collaborator or committer. So the TSC is a group of people who have the high-level governance of the Node project. So obviously, it's mostly the contributors and the users who determine what happens, but sometimes it's really hard to get a technical solution or something. And so the ultimate thing to do there is that the TSC would have to make a decision there. So that's what the TSC is for. I work at Google in Munich in Germany. I'm on the Chrome V8 team, which of course fits really, really nicely because V8 is the engine in Node.js. Everything I do in V8, or I do everything in V8 that's related to Node.js. So that is special changes in the API, that is certain performance improvements. It's also a lot of in the tooling area, because especially for Node.js, the tooling is quite a bit different and there's different needs than for front-end JavaScript. So I'm currently working on the CPU profiler. Obviously, for Node, you want the native frames because you have native modules, so it's slightly more than what you want in front-end CPU profiling. Yeah, so it's changes on V8 that benefit Node a lot. But I also made sure that within the V8 team and a little bit also within the larger Chrome organization, Node is really a first-class citizen, basically. So what we have at the moment is that you cannot commit a single V8 commit if it breaks Node.js. So if you commit something to V8 and Node doesn't build anymore because you changed the API, or if any of the Node tests are failing, your commit is not going to pass the CQ. So that's a big step in terms of how important Node is for V8 there. Yeah, so that's my background. And I guess you're more interested in what's happening in Node than about what I'm doing. So there's lots of exciting things happening in Node.js, and I won't be talking about all of them, and I will be forgetting a bunch. My apologies, there's too many, and I'm not super involved in all of them, obviously. And I'll talk about those that are most exciting to me and that I'm most involved in. And the biggest thing for me is that it feels like Node is growing up. It's getting very mature. We see a lot of enterprise adoption, and I think that's really exciting. It's a little sad to not be like the wild kid on the block anymore and to just run off and experiment with everything. But it's also really nice to see that people, that they trust Node, that it's reliable, that it's secure, and that it will be around, and that it's not just a wildcard Joker thing. So to me, that's the biggest thing, that like maturity that we're seeing. There's a few things coming to that maturity. One thing is the long-term release schedule that we have. So we guarantee 3 or 4 year support for every even Node release. That definitely helps businesses that they're willing to adopt Node.js. We have the Node Foundation behind Node.js now, so more support in terms of, or more stability that makes sure that we'll have contributors and that technical stuff will get done, and that it's not one person who could drop off and nobody else has access to the repo anymore and things like that. And then what I just mentioned from the Chrome team, from Google, that Node is so important to us because, I mean, Chrome's mission is to move the web forward, and Node is a big chunk of front-end development. Like, yes, it's server-side JavaScript, but if you do front-end, you have Node installed. So if V8 were to break Node.js, we're not moving the web forward anymore, because we're not only hurting Node.js, we're hurting all the front-end users. So it's important for Chrome, which also like really helps with the stability and the growing up for Node.js. Yeah, and then last but not least, it's not only Chrome. What's a really cool new thing, which is still experimental, but it's super close to moving out of experimental, is the N API, the native API that's heavily driven by IBM, Microsoft, Neoform, Node Source, Google was involved as well, but a bunch of companies, and it abstracts away, or it's a layer between the JavaScript engine and Node.js. And so the big advantage is that you can switch out the JavaScript engine and you still have a Node.js. You can move between different versions of the engine, but you can even move between completely different engines. And so Microsoft has gone in really big, and we have a Chakra node. So Chakra is the engine in Edge, and you can get a Node.js, but it doesn't have V8 under the hood. It's Chakra. They open sourced that a year and a half ago, which was a really big thing. So they open source Chakra, and so you have Node Chakra, and that's really cool. And that's also a big advantage for Node, because you have less of a vendor lock-in. So again, more, we hope that our users, and then also, yeah, the users and the companies, that they trust us, that Node will be around for a while, and that they're not like stuck with an abandoned project if they start using it now. Okay. So yeah, more stability. Then in in Node 8, so Node 8 is the current long-term release, the LTS version that went into production in October. So if you're lucky, you already adapted to that. There were a bunch of new things. So the N API, that native API that I just mentioned, is in there. Then async await is supported in Node 8. So no more transcribing if you want to use that. A bunch of ES2 features are in it. And then WebAssembly is in it. So like Tracy just mentioned, there's also WebAssembly on the 29th in March. It's really cool, and you can use it in Node. So if you have anything that is really expensive, heavy computation, and it's not a lot of back and forth between JavaScript and that computation, that would really speed up your app if you can use WebAssembly. So that's what you can use since Node 8. And then a little bit more hidden, but still in there, is the new compiler pipeline of V8, the turbofan and ignition. So that's also since Node 8 in there. That just gives you usually a little more speed. So that's nice to have. And then what's coming? So Node 10 is coming, is going to be cut in a few weeks. You'll have more ES2 features. So if you want to use promise, prototype, finally, that will be in there, for example. A bunch of new regex features will also be in there. And then not necessarily in Node 10, I'm not sure how soon that will be, but we're working on web workers. We're doing a bunch of streams improvements. NAPI, hopefully in Node 10, will be out of experimental. So lots of new things coming there. What else? Oh yeah, modules, ESM modules, big topic. We just started a working group. So if you're interested in that, you can follow along. You're welcome to join. Most of our work, it all happens on the GitHub issue tracker. So if you go to github.com/node.js/modules, you can see what the progress is and what the questions are, and see how you can get involved if you want to. And one thing that we've been putting a lot of effort in, well, at least if you look at it from the V8 side, is that because we work so closely with Node now, at Node we are able to have more recent V8 versions than what we used to have in the past. So of course you want stability in Node, which in the past meant we would only upgrade V8 once that branch was already out of stable, which means like Chromium or Chrome is already too old, until we could move it in, because otherwise it was just breaking too many things in Node Core all the time if we put it in too early. And we changed that, and we have a very, very recent version of V8 now always in Node Master. Like even before it goes to stable, we can include it without having tons of extra work to do. So as a Node user, for you, that means you get to use the new ECMAScript features, the new JavaScript features, like really, really soon. You obviously don't have to transcribe it, because on the server side, you can control what you're doing. So that's a really nice thing. And also it gives you, on pretty much all profiles, it gives you better performance, because we're always improving performance. So the sooner you get it, the better. Yeah, so that's that's most of the new things we have in Node. Come check us out if you ever want to see what's really happening inside Node. All the code is on GitHub, Node.js/Node, and that's also where all the issues and discussions and pull requests are happening. There's a TSC repo. I'd say most of the time it's kind of boring discussions there, but of course you can follow along on those too. And if you'd like to contribute to Node.js, to core, or to some of the working groups, we have regular code and learn events. They're usually joined with a Node.js conference. They are free. They're usually a few hours, half a day. And experienced collaborators will help you to get your first Node core commit in. So would be great to see some of you there. And then there's a Node Collaborator Summit in Berlin right before JSConf EU. So if you're in Berlin or if you're coming for JSConf EU, you're welcome to join us there if you're a collaborator or if you want to become a collaborator. So ping me for the details, or maybe I can post the link later. Thanks.
Cool, thank you so much. That was awesome. I love to hear all the exciting things happening in the Node community. So very happy to have you all a part of this. Next up, we have Michael Jackson, who is going to be talking about the state of React.
Hey, thanks for having me on this podcast. It's awesome to be with so many amazing people in the same spot in the same discussion. So super happy to be here and grateful to be here. So as far as React goes, we've been making quite a bit of progress recently. When I say we, I mean as a community. React has been changing a lot, has been improving a lot. A couple of things that have happened kind of recently is so recently. React had introduced better support for things like fragments. So, for example, if you are, returning multiple elements from one of your React render methods, that used to be kind of a sticking point with React. You could only return one element. Now you can just sort of wrap them in a fragment, and you can pass them all back at the same time. React also introduced significantly better support for handling errors. So before, in React 15, you would have, an error somewhere in the tree where you were rendering, and there wasn't any real way for you to sort of catch that gracefully. The whole UI would basically, if there was an error, you would crash. And so they introduced this concept of error boundaries, where if there's an error in one section of the component hierarchy, you can actually catch that and recover from that, which is nice. Currently, changes that are happening in React are React 16.3 is they've already released one beta release of 16.3. There are a couple of cool things in this release. There's a new context API, which is really cool. For a long time in React, context was kind of this like, so if you don't know what context is basically whenever you're building a React app and you have kind of this tree of components, you usually have to pass down what we call props at every single level. So if you've got some data in a parent component and the children need to know about it, you have to pass down that data at every single level of the component hierarchy. Context is kind of this cool kind of up until recently considered very kind of unstable and experimental feature of React, where you don't have to pass down the data at every single level anymore. Instead, you can just have some data in a parent, and you can sort of pipe it all the way down to these children components without having to pass down props at every single level of the hierarchy. So it's really cool. Like I said, up until now, it was considered very experimental and very kind of just a little risky, because there is another feature of React, which is actually an optimization feature that didn't work very well with the old context API, which was the should component update feature. That's essentially your hook into React's reconciler to tell React whether or not a subtree actually needs updates. And context did not play well with that feature, because if you were trying to pass data from a very high level down low, and you said should component update false or no, basically the components down low would not get that data. So the new context API actually works around that issue. And the cool thing about it is it's just using a render prop. So if you haven't heard the term render prop, it's kind of it's just kind of a way of kind of modeling or sharing state and composing state with your React components. It's the very first render prop API that's actually made it into React Core. So it's kind of cool to see React Core moving that way towards composing state. In the past, a lot of state composition has been done traditionally using higher order components, but this is the very first render prop API that's actually made it into React Core. So that's pretty cool. And what that lets us do is that lets us just use components for modeling things. So we don't have to wrap our components with these higher order components anymore. It's still it's still a valid use case. You can still totally go either way. But it's cool to see the React Core team kind of adopting this this principle and integrating it into Core. Something else that is happening in React 16.3 is you can see a big push in the React community right now, and in React Core specifically, towards getting ready for async mode. So React Fiber is something you might have heard of. React Fiber is essentially the ability to suspend or prioritize different pieces of work. So if you've used React at all, you'll know that you don't actually go and manipulate the DOM, or if you're using React Native, you don't actually go and manipulate your views. What you do is you just sort of declare at a certain point in time, here is what the DOM should look like, or here is what the views are, and here are their attributes, and then React takes it over from there and actually goes and renders those things for you. And so we've already delegated quite a bit of control to the framework if we're actually using React. So React Fiber takes that one step further, and instead of, or in addition to delegating control of actually rendering, we're actually going to delegate a little bit more control to React over scheduling, or when that work actually gets done. So for example, we could indicate that some piece of work is very high priority. For example, user interaction, scrolling, a key press. That's super high priority stuff, right? And maybe your network request is lower priority. So if these higher priority types of actions are happening, React will be able to respond to those things more quickly, and still give you a declarative API to say, or to indicate to React which pieces you consider to be high priority and which pieces are low priority. So that's actually really, really cool. It's refining things at this very kind of low level that I think is crucial to providing really great user experience. The React Core team is always laser focused on user experience, and refining things at this kind of level I think is really exciting. It also another use case, for example, is if you were waiting for like an image to load before you wanted to animate in a new view. Say you had a master detail view and you were selecting a list of images, and you wanted to kind of wait for that to load instead of loading the view and then popping in the image whenever it showed up. Wouldn't it be nice to have a way to sort of model that declaratively and say, hey, React, I actually want to wait until this image is loaded before you animate this view in. So, just kind of giving us some hooks to kind of really enhance the user experience at a low level. Another thing that is introduced in React 16.3 is, like I said, in prep for all of this async work, a couple of the lifecycle methods are kind of being deprecated. So all of the will methods, there's component will mount, component will, let me just check the list here to make sure I'm getting, yeah, component will mount, component will receive props, and component will update in async mode are considered unsafe. And so it's encouraged that people rely on the did methods instead, component did update, component did mount, which are going to be considered safer in this async world that we're moving to. Another thing that's dropping in 16.3, which is pretty cool, is strict mode. So it's, again, this is a component, right? So you're modeling all of these things declaratively. Strict mode is a new way to make sure that your code is basically following best practices. Components rendered in strict mode subtrees, you get different warnings in the console. You get warnings about using unsafe lifecycle methods and things like that. So if you want a way to sort of incrementally upgrade your app so that you're ready for async mode when these methods are actually turned off, you just drop a strict mode component into your app, and then you get warnings about it and stuff like that, which is really, really cool. So again, a lot of this stuff is available in 16.3, which the first beta dropped this week, but it's not mandatory. You're going to have ways to upgrade all of this stuff. The React core team is actually very, very good at following Semver and not breaking stuff. A lot of these changes are actually being driven by React's new RFC process, which is really cool. So if you go on to the ReactJS org on GitHub and the RFC's repo, you can see the React core team has developed this way for, it's modeled after the Yarn RFC process and the Ember RFC process. It's basically a way for the community to come forward and say, hey, I have an idea. Here's what I think it could look like. Here's what I think the API could look like. Can I get some feedback from the core team and from other people in the community? The new context API was driven through this process, as well as, I've seen there's a really great RFC out right now for better integration with React and custom elements, or web components. And so that's a really great opportunity, I think, for the rest of the community, to get involved with, influencing the decisions that that React is making, and vice versa. So that's a huge thing that React has been doing for the community. There's also a lot of this doesn't have to do specifically with well, I guess it is React technically. If you've been following React at all, you might have heard of Reason, which is actually a new programming language. And React, there is an implementation of React in Reason called Reason React, which is actually been deployed by Facebook on Messenger.com. Reason is a new language that, among other things, provides type safety guarees, and is built on top of the OCaml compiler toolchain. So it's kind of a cool, kind of experimental thing that's going on, but we've already seen some really, really impressive things. There was Jared Forsyth actually built a game in Reason React that he shipped the same code base on iOS, on Android, and on the web, which kind of blew my mind. So anyway, that's super, super experimental. I think the name was called Gravitron, if you want to check that out. And I think that just about wraps up what's going on in React land. Again, I'm Michael Jackson. I am. I don't think I ever actually said I'm a kind of a core contributor and committer on the React.js repo or organization on GitHub. I'm also the founder of React Training and the author of React Router, which is one of the larger third-party React libraries. So I think that's about it for me and for React.
Awesome, thank you. Tons of questions on the chat, and feel free to keep asking your questions for any of the talks that are happening, and we'll answer them at the end. Next up, we have Evan Yu, the author of Vue.js, and on the Vue core team, who will be giving us a state of Vue.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay, yeah, my connection was a little bit weird just now, so I just want to make sure. Okay, so I do have some slides, so I'm gonna share my screen. And okay, so So hi, I'm Evan Yu, and I work on VueJS. And so this is just going to be some updates on what's happened, things. So this is going to only cover things that's happened since the last This.JavaScript update. And since late 2017, so last minor release that we had was in November last year. That was the 2.5. In 2.5, we shipped with some improved TypeScript integration. So you can get type inference with TypeScript, even just using the default API without having to use classes, which also helps with IDE IntelliSense when you're using, for example, VS Code and the Viter plugin. Even if you're not using TypeScript, you can also get benefits from the improved type inference. We also improved error handling. So we added a hook called error captured, and this hook enables something that's very similar to React's error boundaries that Michael just mentioned. And we also have now support functional components in single file components. So you can use templates, but you can use templates, but they will get compiled down into functional components, which will provide performance benefits in proper use cases. And some new releases in the from the core team. So we released ESLint Vue 4.0. This is a brand new version of the ESLint plugin, which for Vue, which uses a custom parser. So it has the Vue ESLint parser, which is able to parse single file Vue components and able to catch a lot of template errors right at the compilation phase. So you'll get great compile time support for when you're working with Vue single file components, plus a lot of additional Vue specific rules inside JavaScript as well. So this is a lot of work done by Mikhail and Taru. So shout out to them here. New releases for the Vue test util. So this is the official unit testing utility for Vue.js, and it's currently in 1.0 beta, worked by Ed Gerberg. And the test utils provides a bunch of ways for you to create mocked instances of your Vue component, assert its render output, providing mocked props, injecting dependencies, and asserting, basically providing input and asserting output. So if you're familiar with Enzyme, it's like Enzyme for Vue. And we also had a big release for the Vue DevTools, which is the official Chrome DevTools extension for Vue. In 4.0, we introduced a lot of UI improvements, plus some great new features. One of the most important one is probably the ability to just directly edit the state inside the state inspector. And this is a lot of work done by Guillaume, and so shout out to him. And we also released a official news channel, news.vujs.org. So this is a collaborative effort between Damien, Greg, and Adam, and they're working on collecting the graded resources coming out in the Vue ecosystem each week. And the cool thing is it's not only just a newsletter. There will be a accompanying podcast for each episode. So the podcast will just talk over the items in the newsletter. So for those who prefer listening rather than just reading, this is a great way to stay up to date. Okay, so the ecosystem. We have a lot of exciting things happening in the bigger Vue ecosystem. So Node.js is a server-side, a universal application framework. So it makes it extremely easy and simple for you to get up and running with a server-side rendered Vue app. It can also you can also use it for pure client-side app, or you can use it as a static side generator. Just use it. Use Vue single file components, but render them as static HTML files. So it's a versatile framework built on top of Vue. And they just reached 1.0 in January. So big congratulations to them. So if you're more familiar with the React ecosystem, think of this as Next.js plus Gatsby. So it kind of has a functionality of both, although details might differ. So in February, we also saw the 1.0 release of Vuetify, which is a complete suite of material design components for Vue.js. So this is probably one of the most feature-rich, feature-complete material design component library for Vue. And John Leiter has been working on it for a very long time, and they just reached 1.0 recently. So congrats to them as well. And the NativeScript team, they just announced a NativeScript Vue 1.0 at VueJS Amsterdam last week. And this is a native rendering solution for Vue.js. So think that you can use the Vue syntax to be able to use the same code base to render to both web and iOS and Android applications. And this is not in a web view. This is real native rendering, just like React Native and Weeks. So they just reached 1.0, so cool. If you want to use Vue to develop native mobile applications, definitely check it out. And we also have some better external integrations. So VS Code shipped a feature that allows you to debug Vue applications right inside VS Code. Code Sandbox is a service that allows you to create a Vue application, including single file component support, right in your browser. So it's like Webpack and the whole tech stack running right in your browser. Prettier 1.10 shipped support for prettifying Vue single file components. And Ionic 4, because now it's rebuilt using web components, it can now be used inside Vue as well. So one of the bigger other projects that we've been working on in the past few months is the 3.0 of the Vue CLI. So if you've used Vue CLI 2, you know it's a very thin layer. It's simply pulling some templates from GitHub. But in 3.0, we took a different approach. We realized that some problems in the previous version of the CLI, mainly that the templates are not upgradable. And we also had some problems when forked templates have to constantly manually sync with the upstream. And so the Chrome team had a PWA template. There was a TypeScript starter from the Microsoft teams. And both of these had to constantly sync with the upstream and cause a lot of back and forth. And they could be out of sync and could have conflictions from time to time. So we wanted to have a new architecture that is zero config by default, but allows additional features to be shipped as plugins. And we also wanted to be configurable without ejection, and everything that isn't built-in should also be implementable as a plugin. So a lot of lofty goals, but I think we've managed to have something that is able to do most of these. And so the current VCI 3.0 is in beta, so you can try it out by doing npm install g @vue/CLI. And once you've installed it, you get the Vue binary, and the zero config version of it is really simple. You can really just create a single Vue component that's a Vue file, and then you run vueserve in the directory, and you get a application that's powered by Webpack, Babel, ESLint with hot reload, and you can also use Vue build to just build it into a deployable bundle. But if you want to go the manual way, you can pick the features that we support out of the box, including TypeScript, PWA, router, Vuex, preprocessors, linters, unit testing solutions, end-to-end testing solutions. So we have unit testing using Jest and Mocha, end-to-end testing using either Cypress or Nightwatch, which is Selenium-based. It's also possible to configure the project using a Vue config.js file, and we allow you to configure the internal Webpack configuration using either Webpack merge or Webpack chain. And you can use the dedicated configuration files for Babel, PostCSS, ESLint, TypeScript, and etc. The plugin API allows a plugin to extend the core Webpack config and register custom commands and inject prompts and file generators. So we are hoping to see the community coming up with plugins that allows us to support more use cases. And one of the cool features that CLI come with is build targets. So by default, everything is built in app mode, but you can also ship a file in lib mode. So you can build a Vue component and ship it as a library, or you can build it as a web component. So when you run VueCI service build target WC async and give it a glob, it will find all those components and build them into a code split bundle with a very tiny entry file. And when an instance of a corresponding custom element is used on the page, it'll fetch the underlying implementation asynchronously. So this allows you to reuse the existing Vue components inside of a normal Vue component, but you can build them and distribute them as vanilla web components. So the resulting web components can be used in a vanilla JavaScript application or even inside a React application or an Angular application. So this is great for interop. So shout out to some of the inspirations we've looked at when we're working on the new version of CLI, Create React App, Poi, Neutrino, Ember CLI, and Stencil. And some of the upcoming things in the Vue ecosystem. So we are working on Webpack 4 integration for the CLI, and we want to collaborate with the community for more target platforms for SSR, NativeScript, Weeks, and Electron. We also have Vue Core, the next upcoming Minar 2.6. We're going to ship a ESM browser build, which allows you to directly import Vue so that you can use it in browsers that support ES modules natively. Better async error handling, better warning output. So when you have template compilation errors, we're going to provide you with line numbers and code frames, and V4 iterator support. So these are the confirmed features, but there's also a bunch of things that's in the pipeline, and stay up to date when we do the official release. 2.6 next is going to be worked on in parallel with 2.6 and after 2.6, but it's going to have the same feature set, the same API, except we're going to swap the internal reactivity system with proxy. So 2.6 next is going to be targeting modern browsers, i.e. IE is going to be dropped, so it's going to support only Edge and up browsers that support latest ES 2015 and plus features. We're going to upgrade the code base, leveraging the latest ES features. So no breaking changes in principle. The only breaking change is really browser compatibility, and both versions going to be maintained in parallel. And we also have some planning to do some work with Vuex, assuming that async await will be more universally available. We can leverage to simplify the API and potentially eliminating the separation of actions and mutations, because the concept came in the first place to help with asynchronicity. So with async await, we see the opportunity to greatly simplify the API to make state management even simpler. One final announcement, VueConf US is coming soon. It's in March 26th to 28th in New Orleans. And so if you don't know it's happening and you want to attend, make sure to go to us.vuejs.org to check it out. We also have some workshops at the conference. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Evan. Love that. There were so many really cool things related to
cool stuff.
Yes. Awesome. So again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the live chat, and we will be talking in just a little bit. And next up, we have Ben Lesh, who is the author of RxJS 5 and above, also on the RxJS core team. Ben, do you have amazing slides?
I have slides. I don't know if they're amazing. But I have slides.
I have to give you crap. All right, Ben, take it away.
All right. Let's see. Start. I always get confused. Sometimes I'm in PowerPoint. Oh, here we go. All right, everybody's presentations are so great so far, by the way. I'm excited to try a lot of these things I see in Vue. I haven't tried Vue yet. I'm excited to try a lot of the stuff I see in React and Vue so far. I have to wonder if people are like, I'd like to try Rx. Yeah, probably not as much, but I think it's so exciting so far. All right, so this is the state of RxJS up till now. Right now we're working on Git. We've got 6.0 beta or alpha out, and we're working towards getting to beta. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that. But first, I'm going to talk about the current version that everybody's using, which is 5.5x. So I think 5.5.6 is the latest right now. So what we've done so far is we have branched off the work that's is in 5.5 to the stable branch. If you actually come to the RxJS repository looking for things and you start looking through the code base, you're actually looking at the 6x work. So that's all been moved to the stable branch, and master is now what we're releasing in alpha. So it's important to note if you come to the GitHub repo. 5.5, we talked about pipeable. We called them lettable operators last time. I'm trying to kill that. We're just going to call it pipeable operators. It's the RxJS core team's advice to move to pipeable operators as soon as you can. You don't necessarily have to, but it's advisable. They've got a lot of really great advantages that a lot of people have talked about. In particular, if you're on the front end and you're dealing with bundlers and trying to get the smallest bundle size possible, pipeable operators have a lot of advantages in that area. And Igor, who actually I believe is speaking next, did a talk at ReactiveConf that wasn't necessarily Angular specific. It was talking about, or it was at ReactiveConf. I don't know if I just said ReactConf or not. That wouldn't make any sense for Igor to be at ReactConf. But he did a talk at ReactiveConf about making bundle sizes smaller and specifically focused on RxJS and talked about the pipeable operators there. Also, what we've got internally at Google, there's a TS-lint rule in transformation that helps you migrate from the dot-chained operators that you have with add and over to pipeable operators. So, and I've been told we're going to be releasing that publicly after we clean some stuff out of it. I believe there's probably some internal stuff in the transformation side of things there. So hopefully we get that out soon so people can use it. So moving on to talking about the 6.0 alpha. Right now, I think the current version is alpha 3. I'll probably be publishing an alpha 4 here pretty soon. The biggest thing that's going to come out of this that is going to be a breaking change, which is why we have a new major version for people. The biggest change is going to be this change the way we imported things. So before we had too many ways to import stuff. So for example, if you wanted to have use of the map operator, here's 6 different ways that you could have map either added to observable or import it so you could use it in some way. It's nutty. Like there's no reason that a library like RxJS needs this many ways to import these things. Again, here's examples of different ways you can import observable that each have different effects actually, and people didn't quite understand that, and different ways you could import, in this case, the from event helper or the observable that is created from event. Yeah, this is kind of difficult. The top one there for from event is definitely what you should be doing in any version of 5x. It's existed for the duration of 5x, but yeah, there's too many ways to do this, and it's confusing for people, and we want to fix that in 6.0. So also in 5.5 even, you end up quite frequently with a lot of imports just to get what you need. So if you're doing some simple thing, you have 10, 12 lines of imports just for RxJS, and it gets a little ugly at the top of your code file. Not that people's code files always look pretty up where the imports are, but I don't want to be the cause of a lot of pain there. So it could look something like this. In 5.5, it got a little better because you can actually import multiple operators from the same import spot from RxJS/operators. Just a caveat, a little bit of a warning here. Webpack 3 will not tree shake properly if you do this, so you'll end up importing all the operators. If you're using Webpack 4, you'll be fine. So that's something to be aware of. But you still see where we've got we're importing observable and from event and pipe and async, the async scheduler from different spots. So in 6 alpha, we've cleaned this up a lot to where now there's 2 import points. There'll be one for all of the different types and helpers and schedulers, and then another one for all of the operators. There's still some discussion about perhaps collapsing it just into one, which is RxJS, but that's still being discussed for a variety of reasons. I'll talk about that in just a couple minutes. We also are trying to hide internals, quote unquote hide. You can still access it, but before people could actually import any implementation detail from a deep import like RxJS/observable from event observable. We didn't really want you doing that, but people were doing it anyways because it looks allowed and it looks fine. We've opted to move things to RxJS/internal/observable or /internal yada yada. Usually the convention is to do /lib. It's my personal feeling that not enough people understand what lib means, which means this is part of some implementation detail. I wanted to be very explicit that you're doing something that's off the beaten path, and it might change out from underneath you, so be careful. So if you're using RX6 and above and you're importing from something underneath internal, just be aware that you avoided a warranty there. So RxJS 6 and all this talk about pipeable operators, I frequently get asked, what about all of the add operator imports? A lot of people think that they don't exist in 5.5 anymore, and that would be a breaking change. We wouldn't do that. So we have this thing, just to explain to some people, where you have this this idea of patching the prototype and or patching the actual observable constructor with static methods, where you're actually there's a typo in here, but where you're actually calling these imports and they mutate the prototype. They add methods to the prototype, and that allows you to do dot chaining. We're gonna still support that in RX6. It's not advised that you use that, but we didn't want to completely break everybody. However, we are going to deprecate them, and then ideally we're going to move them to some sort of support library off to the side. So you can actually import another library that adds that if you really want that. It has a lot of use in, say, Node, where people don't necessarily care about the size of a bundle, but yeah, so we're going to continue to support that. It won't just break on you right now if you're using the 6.0 alpha. Other things in 6.0, there's changes to error handling semantics. So this is not something that a lot of people would really run into, but if you had a synchronous unhandled error in version 5 and under, like even RX2, so in this case, I've got an observable that as soon as you subscribe to it, synchronously just throws an error, right? And so that error is going to get propagated down the error notification channel in the observable. And you subscribe to it in a way where you don't give it an error handler. Say you have an observer you pass to it that just has a next or just has a complete, or you don't pass an error handler to the subscribe with 3 functions method. In this case, what happens is the error goes all the way down. Even if you have a map in there that throws, that error propagates down synchronously. It gets to the bottom of the chain, the observable chain, and it says, hey, nothing's handled me. I'm going to rethrow this. And when you throw an error in JavaScript, it unwinds the stack looking for a try-catch block to handle it. And the problem with this is it'll unwind the stack back to maybe somewhere where you're multicasting, and that's going to break a for loop that's notifying multiple observers, and you get producer interference. It causes really weird, hard to debug bugs. Like it's not great. So the only thing that actually this behavior would even support would be something where if you had a synchronous observable that synchronously errored, you could, in theory, wrap it in a try-catch. Another thing it would support that's even more edge casey than this would be if you had an observable you implemented, like inside of the body of the observable, you could wrap a try-catch around a next call, like observer.next. That's even stranger. It's nothing that this is not something you should be doing. This is probably an anti-pattern. The problem is if the observable is asynchronous, which is most of the time, try-catch isn't going to work anyhow. So if you're doing that, it's an anti-pattern because it's probably not always going to work. RxJS 6 is actually going to schedule and throw the unhandled error. So what it does is it literally just does a set timeout and throws the error inside of that. And that's what's called host report errors. And that means that it's going to go to window on error or process on error in Node, and you can still handle it as an unhandled error, any other unhandled error that you would get in some async like event that would happen in JavaScript. But more importantly, it's not going to try to unwind the stack and potentially break something in your observable chain. So another thing that we're going to do in RxJS 6 is we've got a PR. I've got a PR in right now that hasn't been merged because we're still discussing it, and there's still some more work to do to remove result selectors. And a lot of people don't really know what result selectors are, which is why we're removing it. What is a result selector? If you're doing a merge map or a switch map or these other things, there is a second function argument that you can pass to it, where the first function is, hey, I'm going to take a value and map it into a new observable. But the second function is, I'm going to take the values from my new observable and the value from my source observable, and I'm going to do something with them and map them into the final result that I want. This adds a lot of complexity to our TypeScript typings. It adds a lot of complexity to the library. In general, it's just a lot of complexity for a feature that most people don't even use. They exist in a lot of different operators, from merge map, switch map, concat map, and those ones that we all know, to things like first, last, and expand, and quite a few more. And I mean, the problem is they actually muddy the API even further. Like RxJS already has a really expansive API it's confusing enough for people, and adding this additional result selector doesn't make your code particularly more readable if you're using it, and it also just makes the whole possible signature of, say, something like merge map, which also takes a concurrency limit and those two functions, a little bit more confusing to look at. They really drastically increased the size of the library. So far, without having removed all of the result selectors yet, I believe the PR stands at about 2,000 lines of code removed from the code base. And they're also not great for error handling because of where the result selector is. You can't really compose a catch or a retry onto it like you could if you would just use a map, which is the easy replacement. So in order to replace this with a map, if you are actually doing this and you're scared about this change, is you would take what we have here and you would just simply add a map to that inner observable that did the same thing. So it shouldn't be a huge change for most people. So yeah, again, it's going to eliminate thousands of lines of code from the RxJS code base. And the real goal of RxJS 6 is to maintain our current performance profile as far as operations per second, but drastically reduce the size impact of using RxJS with your framework or with your app of any sort. It shouldn't. We don't want RxJS's size to be a deciding factor in whether or not you use it in your app. It should be, is this going to be helpful for writing whatever features I need my app? Not like, oh my God, is it worth the cost? So we're trying to cut that down. Another thing that we're doing is improvements to testing and some guidance around testing. So we want to improve the ergonomics around marble tests. OJ Kwan, who is another core team member, has a library called Rx Sandbox. Basically what it did is kind of rewrite the Rx test scheduler to make it a little bit easier to use marble tests. So we're trying to incorporate some of the ideas of that into the main library. We also want to provide guidance for people, like how to test without marbles, good testing strategies. 80% of the time, you do not need marble diagrams to test observables. It's totally fine to use like a synchronous of observable or a subject or something like that to test your observable. Most of the time, you don't really need marble diagrams, although they are pretty nice. And marble diagrams are these kind of ASCII art to show what's happening over time in an observable chain. So notable changes with this will be the marble test ticks will be 1 virtualized millisecond instead of 10. I don't know why it was 10. I did that forever ago. Totally my fault and weird. And we're also going to add some marble syntax features to do things like, if you want marbles that last multiple days or something, then you should be able to specify that in your marble diagrams. Documentation improvements. This is a bit for Tracy. Tracy has been leading the effort along with many, many other people contributing to this. RxJS documentation has historically been really bad for my tenure as working on RxJS, in part because we don't have a lot of contribution, and not just necessarily to the docs, but to the repo in general, and just in part because it's something that's not easy to document. So we've got a lot of really wonderful folks working at this repo here at github.com/reactivex/rxjs-docs. If you're interested in contributing, you should go check it out. It's an Angular app. There's a lot of really great people working on it. You can contact Tracy at LadyLead on Twitter. And we should be deploying this very soon. And there's a lot of work left to get the documentation updated, but the actual app itself seems like it's pretty close and ready to go. So there's still a few open questions in 6 alpha before we actually get to being able to get to beta. The most notable of which is that modules are hard. So unlike a lot of frameworks have their own kind of specific build pipeline that they're targeting. And so they don't have this concern as much as RxJS does, but RxJS gets used in a lot of different places, which means we have to support everyone's bundlers and everyone's module preferences. So we have to support CJS and ESM and AMD and globals and all sorts of other things. And this means that there can be weird problems. There's an issue right now where, you know, what happens if someone has a library they've implemented in CJS and they're importing RxJS via CJS, and then somebody else has a library that they implemented in ESM and they're importing RxJS via ESM, and then you are depending on both of those. You end up with 2 copies of RxJS because of, you know, some like weird bundling nuance that I don't really even fully understand, quite honestly. So there's questions around this and how we're going to be able to handle this and move forward. And I suspect that we're going to have to talk with and try to cooperate with a lot of people, like the people that are here today in this talk, in order to work out what the best strategy is. And before, when I was talking about how there's 2 import sites, RxJS and RxJS/operators, and we might have to move to just having 1 import point, which is just RxJS, it would be related to this if we did have to do that. So RxJS 6, we're targeting to be out of alpha and in beta at the end of this month. It might be a week or so after that. It really depends on engineer power availability for the next couple weeks, but it should be very soon. The primary goal is just to get everything that is a breaking change solidified before we get into beta. So there's little to no breaking changes while we're in beta, and then that will make the beta nice and short, and we can get to actually just having RxJS 6 pushed to production. Things to keep an eye on related to RxJS. So there's a WHATWG observable proposal. This is a proposal that adds an on method to event target that returns an observable. It's the reason that you want to watch this is, well, one, I'm trying to champion the proposal, but the other reason that you want to watch this is the shape of that observable is slightly different, only slightly different than RxJS's observable, in that subscribe returns an abort controller rather than a subscription, and that's because abort controller already exists in the DOM because of fetch. And so what this looks like, or what this would mean, is anything that you have add event listener, remove event listener on, that's an event target. And at the top here, you see how you would have to add and remove event listeners from an event target. You actually need to keep around 2 pieces of information. One, which is the name of the event, like mouse move in this case, and the other, which is a reference to the function that you're adding and removing. So you need to keep those 2 pieces around. If you're using the observable version, then what you'd be able to do is just keep a subscription. And subscriptions, in this case, it's not really a subscription, it's an abort controller, but they can be composed in a variety of ways. So this is a little bit nicer as far as an API for adding and removing things. The other thing that's interesting about it for people is if you're doing some sort of event delegation, at the top you'd see how you do event delegation, where maybe you say every click in the document, but only if it matches something that has this particular class on it. I want you to handle it. So there's a typo in there too, hander instead of handler. That's pretty good. Anyways, so but with the what wig observable proposal, there's actually a filter method on it. So you'd be able to just filter your events down to what you cared about. So it's kind of nice. There's also some other nice things, take until and first. You'd be able to do drag and drop a little cleaner. It's pretty good. All right, so another thing I'd like you to watch is the TC39 pipeline operator. This works out of the box with RxJS pipeable operators. It's really great. I highly recommend checking this out. So you would be able to use the pipeable operators like this. You can already do this in Babel with a Babel transform, which is pretty good. But yeah, so this is what it would look like with the pipeline operator. Without the pipeline operator, you would use pipe like so. So it's just a little cleaner, in my opinion, but it can be used for a lot of really cool stuff. And finally, another thing to check out would be the RxJS TS-lint rules. This is a set of TS-lint rules that allow you to do things like enforce finish notation or enforce that you don't want people to use the add operator imports, that sort of thing. So that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Next up, we have Igor Minar, and Igor will be giving us the state of Angular. He's on the Angular core team. Go ahead and take it away, Igor.
Hello, everybody. Well, thanks for having me. Let me just present. Awesome. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. So hello, everybody. My name is Igor. I represent Angular. I'm on the Angular team. And just to briefly recap, what is Angular about? It's a platform to make it easy to build beautiful, performant user interfaces for web and beyond. So this is what we are trying to do, and all the efforts that everybody on the team is taking is targeted towards this goal. If you look at the efforts that we have, we can actually split them into four buckets. The first one is framework. This is the core part of Angular that makes it possible to build applications. Then we have component library, specifically the material library and the component development kit, which is a way to build components with the basic building blocks, so you don't need to start from scratch building 3 components and other very basic components. We also have a tooling. Tooling effort is all about how do we make it easy to scaffold applications, how do we make it easy to develop applications and build them and package them in a way where the applications that are deployed are very performant, are very small, and easy to use by the users. And lastly, and this is something that's very important to us, is the community and the ecosystem. Because no matter how big the Angular team is or how hard we work, we will never be able to satisfy all of the needs that application developers have. And this is where community comes in, and they can fill in the gaps and provide reusable components, documentation or tutorials, training, books, all kinds of stuff that is very useful when one needs to build an application with Angular. We have some guiding values that help us make decisions. The three most important to us, three most important ones are, we want to build applications that users really love to use. We also want to make sure that developers and the people that build these applications love to building these applications. And we want to do it in a way where the community that enables all of this is one where everybody feels welcome and safe. I can't say enough about our community. It's really one of those things that make it possible for me to be on Angular. I don't think I could be part of Angular if it weren't for our amazing community. And there are just so many meetups and events and different groups that get together to work on Angular, discuss Angular, or help each other, and that's really amazing. So I just want to give shout out to everybody around the world who's participating in this. Thank you. Well, let's talk about the evolution of Angular. We've been around for quite a few years, and I just want to focus on the last 3 years when we started with the release of Angular version 2. Since then, we decided that we want to change how we build Angular and how we evolve Angular. We decided that we will be releasing a major release every 6 months. This release will be backwards compatible with the previous release. And we'll make it sure that the updates to the new versions are very easy. And the reason why we do this is because as a platform, we want to create a sense of stability, but also we want to make sure that we evolve and we don't get stuck in some old patterns or old behavior that might not be suitable for building modern applications. So every 6 months, we have a chance to reset slightly in a way that is not very disruptive and is not painful for developers, and allows us to correct the course and make major progress. With this strategy, we already released 3 major versions of V2 in September of 2016. That was the initial version of Angular. The next one was in March 2017. We actually skipped version 3 for some very good reasons. You can blame me for that. And we went to version V4. In this version, we released a new version of the rendering engine that does all of the manipulation and all of the rendering in Angular applications, and made some other performance improvements. In November 2017, we released version V5. This one was focused primarily on tooling and making sure that our tree shaking story is significantly better with huge gains and actually losses in the payload size. And currently, we're working on V6, which is targeting March or April 2018 for the release. Just to take a quick look at how we're doing on performance. As I said, performance is one of very important goals of Angular. Because we don't want just the application to be easy to build or look beautiful. We also want it to be very performant. So in 2017, we made a huge progress in reducing the payload size. We actually use Angular IO, which is an Angular application built with Angular framework, with the material design component library, and with the CLI as a guinea pig to just gauge how we are doing. And throughout the year, we reduced the size by more than half. And these are just numbers for 2017. We're going to have updated numbers for 2018 as soon as we cut the V6 release. Let's talk about V6 just briefly. I don't want to go too much into the details because many things are still in works. We're a few weeks out for the RC. But generally, this is the roadmap that we published for V6. You can find it at v6.angular.io. Some of the highlights are, as Ben mentioned, RxJS V6 is a huge part of this release. We're actually spending a lot of time both on RxJS project, but also internally at Google, making sure that RxJS V6 is very successful and easy to upgrade to. We are actually upgrading the whole Google to RxJS V6 as we speak. The next item on the list is Ivy Renderer. Some of you might have heard about this. This is a new generation of the renderer for Angular. It seems that we now are in a habit where every other major version, we just rewrite the core parts of Angular from scratch. And this is the next iteration of that. We call it Ivy. There are different explanations of what that means. Let's not go into that right now. But I'll talk a little bit about Ivy Renderer in a bit. I have a separate slide for that. The next big item is Angular package format. Angular package format is a way or specification for packaging Angular itself as well as Angular libraries for distribution through NPM in a way where we are making sure that the packages are compatible with the most commonly used build tools and are targeting most commonly used runtime environments, but also are focused on performance. We want to make sure that the packaging format is suitable for consumption by the build tools in a way where those build tools are able to do optimizations. We rev this package format pretty much with every major version. And with V6, the focus is going to be primarily on compatibility with Webpack v4, which is going to be released very soon. And it's going to bring some very exciting features when it comes to tree shaking and ability to optimize the payload size. But in order for us to be able to take advantage of that, we need to modify the package format just slightly. So that's one of the things that we're doing in V6. TypeScript 2.7 was released a few weeks ago. We are targeting to make sure that we can support it. I don't think we are taking any advantage of the new features just yet. Usually we just jump on the latest stable version of TypeScript in a major version, and then throughout the minors, we start taking advantage of the features. Elements, Angular Elements is a way to wrap components, Angular components, into web components. I'm going to talk about this just in a bit. The next item is tree shakeable providers. If you know Angular, you know that we have a concept of providers or services, which is a way to build reusable parts of your application in a way where you don't need a UI. So this is usually used for like authentication routines, or for logging, for any kind of support that doesn't typically have a UI component. In the past, these providers were not tree shakeable, which meant that if you build a library like Material Design and had a service or had a provider that allowed you to, for example, do better accessibility support, that service or that provider would never be tree shaking, regardless of whether it was used or not in a particular end application. With some of the design changes we made in V6, this is going to be the last thing in Angular that is not going to be fully tree shakeable. So as of V6, all parts of Angular will be tree shakeable, which will improve the code size for applications that use lots of libraries, Angular libraries. There are various miscellaneous framework improvements specifically targeting performance, ergonomics, simplicity, and some of the other things. We are switching, for example, we're changing the default for certain options. For example, in the past, we introduced the option to remove the white space from templates and ignore it. This reduced the size. We made an opt-in just because there is a slight chance that it's a breaking change for certain CSS rules. In V6, we're now confident that this is very low pain and very few applications are affected. At Google, we didn't actually have any that were directly affected. So we're just changing the default, and we're doing this for other options as well. We are in this V6 release, we're also spending time on improving the build infrastructure and CI infrastructure for Angular. We're doing this for two reasons, and the reasons why I'm highlighting is because we want to be more productive ourselves, but this also affects the community and ability for the community members to contribute to the project. When it's much easier to build and test Angular locally and also on CI, then it's much easier for third-party contributors or community contributors to come and send us changes. So we're making lots of changes related to how we build and test Angular to make it easier for other people to contribute, and it's really paying off. And lastly, we're also making changes to Angular IO, which is our primary outreach and documentation site. With the focus on improved documentation, we are completely rewriting the templates for API documentation. So the API docs will be much easier to read. And after V6, we are planning a major sweep to improve the content of API docs. But first, we need to set up the infrastructure, and that's part of this. I mentioned Ivy already. Ivy is the new renderer for Angular. It's fully tree shakeable. It's backwards compatible. which is very important for us because we could not change how we render Angular applications in a way where nobody could just flip a switch and start using it. So one of the main design goals is to make sure that Ivy is backwards compatible. It's just everything under the hood that is not visible to code that uses Angular is very different. We already have some results. Hello World is currently under 10K. I think it was 8 point something when I last checked. Before compression, and it's I think 3 point something after compression. The cool thing is about Ivy is that you really pay only for the features that you use, and this is what makes Ivy different compared to the current architecture that we have under the hood in Angular. So if there are features in Angular that you don't use, you just don't pay cost for them. You don't pay in the payload size. And this means that as we improve Angular, as we evolve Angular, we can add more and more features without worrying about the additional cost, because the developers will pay for those features only if they use them. And this makes Ivy very different from many of the previous approaches that we tried in Angular. Our plan is to release Ivy behind the flag in V6, and test it and turn it on by default at Google over the summer. Make sure everything's working as expected, and then if there are no surprises, we expect Ivy to become the default renderer in V7. If you want to know more about it, check out ivy.angular.io, which is just a redirect to an issue that describes the current status, some demos, and some more information about Ivy. The next thing I want to highlight is Angular Elements. Angular Elements is a project that was previously in Angular Labs, a place where we experiment with ideas. The general idea behind Elements is making it possible for developers to write Angular components and then wrap them into web components so that they can be used in scenarios where you would not build a full Angular application. So some of the important things about Angular Elements is that it's the same Angular. It's everything you know about Angular applies to Elements. It just wraps your component into a custom element. It's a web standard, so it makes it possible for you to just take the Angular component and drop it into any application, into any modern browser, and it will just work. With V6, our goal is to deliver the first stage of Elements in a stable way. We are targeting use of Elements within Angular applications. This might sound a little odd, but there are many common scenarios where you would want to use web components within Angular applications. After V6, we are targeting the use cases where you would use Angular Elements outside of Angular applications. And the reason for this is just if you want to do that, then the whole build system and tooling infrastructure needs to be slightly modified, and it's going to take us a little time to do all of that. But that's coming after V6. The last thing I want to highlight in V6 is that V6 for us is really the combination of a framework component library and the CLI tooling. So most of the items that I talked about so far were specific to the framework. But in V6, we're actually unifying the release cycle and versioning and compatibility of everything we worked on across the board. So V6 will actually be the first release where we'll release the framework, the component library, and CLI together as version V6. All of these will be backwards compatible with the previous version. And this is how we're going to be evolving all three of these components going forward. Just to highlight some of the improvements in the component library, we're going to be adding some more components. Specifically, we're working on a virtual scroller. We are working on some tree components and improving the CDK, the component development kit, which is an unstyled version of material libraries that allow you to just bring your own custom look and feel to already built components. And for CLI, some of the highlights for CLI are Webpack 4 compatibility with, again, focus on better improvements in tree shakeability and making payload sizes smaller, faster build system. And for the first time, we're also going to support building libraries with the CLI. So our goal is to make sure that CLI supports not only building applications, but also libraries. And this is going to be part of the CLI v6 release, which I'm super excited about. We're targeting RC0 for framework in early March. Some component library and the CLI, they will need a little more time to reconcile the changes that will happen in the framework. So, but in the framework, it's early March, and then the final is end of March. Hopefully not April, but there might be some chance that if something goes wrong, we will need a week or two to finalize things and release them. The last thing I want to highlight, which is not quite related to the V6 release, is some of the efforts we have going on in Angular Labs. Angular Labs is a way for us to experiment with ideas that are not quite ready for prime time. But if you are a developer that has is targeting certain scenarios, and you have ability to tolerate some pain of not working with completely polished ideas and implementations, then Angular Labs is something that you should take a look at. And one of the main efforts that we have in Angular Labs right now is this effort that we refer to as ABC, which stands for Angular, Bazel, and Closure. It's a way to build applications in a way how we build them at Google. We mentioned this several times in the past. The way Google develops applications is very different from how open source or developers outside of Google build applications, which is sometimes challenging for us because then we need to target two different build stacks, two different ways of building applications. It's good because we get exposure to different scenarios, different things that we wouldn't see otherwise, but it's also challenging because now we have two things to support. Our goal is to make sure that developers that want to can build applications in the way Google builds them, and ABC is all about that. With the current effort, what we are doing is we're actually trying to bring Bazel as an option into the CLI, specifically for libraries. We're not ready to support applications, but we expect that by the V6 timeframe, we should be able to make it possible to use Bazel to build libraries within the CLI, in addition to the current stack. And we're also partnering with ng Packager, which is a community-built solution for building libraries. So this is going to be just one of the many options available, and developers can experiment with this. But the cool thing about Bazel is that it's a build system that is agnostic of languages and targeted environments. This is how Google developed all of the applications. We have a single build system that supports JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, C, C++, Android, everything you can think of. And what we are doing is just making sure that the integration with the TypeScript and Angular when it comes to working with Bazel is very smooth. The first step for us is to migrate Angular repository over to Bazel, which we're very close to finalizing. And really what we see as a payoff of all these efforts is speed and scale. Bazel is an option to build applications at a scale, at Google scale, because of parallelization and immutability and many of the primitives that are hidden deep in the build system that allows us to very efficiently build even large code bases. And it's kind of surprising that Angular itself already got into a state where we will greatly benefit from tools like this, where just publishing and building all of the packages that Angular has in the monorepo can today take several minutes. With Bazel, it can be several seconds. So it's a huge, huge difference. The last thing I want to highlight is after V6, we're going to have a main conference, ngConf, in Salt Lake City, where we are going to be talking about all of these things that landed and sharing some of the more interesting details that I'm not ready to share yet. So if you care about hearing this news, you either come to ngConf or watch the live stream. And with that, thank you very much.
Yay, thanks, Igor. Yeah, and stay tuned. Stephen Fluent and myself are planning out Angular contributor days, probably happening, I think, on the 31st or so. So it's going to be a good opportunity for everybody to tune in and contribute. And Igor will probably be dragged along. I'm teasing, but probably most likely the case. So next up, we have Justin, who will be talking about Polymer. You can follow Justin at Justin Fagnani on Twitter, and we'll give it to you, Justin.
Hello there. I'm Justin Fagnani, and I'm from the Polymer team inside of Chrome. Let me get my slides that I have presented up here. Then we'll start. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, I'm Justin Fagnani, and I lead our tools team on Polymer. So this includes things like the Polymer CLI and our build system and bundler. And I also work on web components related standards. So things like refining the current standards like custom elements and Shadow DOM, or developing new standards, things like templating or theming. And then also I've been recently working on a new HTML templating library called lit.html, which is kind of designed to fill like a last gap in web components for managing DOM. So first, let's talk about web components a little bit. So 2017 was a really great year for web components, especially for mobile. Safari has shipped, their last two versions of Safari actually have shipped with custom elements and Shadow DOM support. So this brings the percentage of mobile browsers that support web components really, really, really high up there with Chrome and Safari.
Uh-oh. Did we lose Justin? No.
Oh no.
I know. It's okay. Polymer is just too exciting for us. We can't handle it.
Maybe we should skip to the next speaker and then see if Justin can come back.
Yes, I do think so. Ricardo, did you want to go ahead and get started on State of Ember?
Yep.
Cool, awesome. So introducing Ricardo Mendes, who is a Ember core team member, and he's going to give us a quick update on the state of Ember.
Okay, so let me share my screen real quick. Okay, does that look okay?
Looks perfect.
Okay, so welcome to the Ember presentation on the state of Ember.js for This.JavaScript. Quickly, I'm Ricardo Mendes. I work at Talkdesk, and I belong to the core team and the learning team. The learning team especially is a passion of mine, so I'm kind of biased towards that, like I mentioned, I think, the last time. First off, some quick announcements. There's an Ember community survey going on. You have until March 7 to fill it out, because after that we close it, and then the survey team analyzes the data and the results are presented at EmberConf, which is happening March 13 and 14th in Portland. Because EmberConf is just around the corner and we did release Ember 3.0, things are like a little bit scattered and confusing, and we might have kept some aces up our sleeves for EmberConf, so be sure to tune in and see if anything is revealed there. Okay, so EmberConf, March 13 and 14th, tickets are still up, and myself and Jen Weber, who also belongs to the learning team, are giving a contributors workshop. So if you do use Ember and are curious about becoming a contributor, and helping out the project, which is very focused on the community. Subscribe to that training, and I'll see you there. So first off, I'll speak a little bit about the releases that happened since the last This.JavaScript, which were 2.16, 17, and 18. I think 2.15 hadn't been released, but I mentioned it, and what I said before was what was eventually released. So if you're curious, you can check the previous one out. Let's start with 2.16. So in 2.16, there was a big change, which is we switched from importing Ember as a sort of namespace, and everything was inside of that Ember namespace, to Ember modules. There's an RFC that describes the intentions behind this process, because we didn't just transform into modules, as you can see in the code sample on the bottom, willy-nilly. There's a logic to them. The idea is to chunk related parts of the framework into packages. So here you can see that you import the component class from the component package, and then there's a service, and you can import the service inject, which is for dependency injection, from that package. There are a bunch more imports and packages. There's the explanation in the RFC, as I mentioned, and then there's code mod, so you can automatically transition from one to the other. And there's also an Ember RFC 176 data repository that is a source of truth for the mappings. Some people have used those files because we provide JSON files for people to do their own transformations. So someone did a very nice little app to search for the new imports. On 2.17, one major thing was that 2.16 LTS was released. For those who don't know, Ember has a train release schedule, which means that every 6 weeks, more or less, a new minor version is released, and every 4 versions, an LTS is released. So when 2.17 was released, 2.16 was considered an LTS, and we have documents explaining this. Essentially, you get security and bug fixes for a whole LTS cycle and security fixes for 2 LTS cycles, if I'm not mistaken. So on 2.17, we had the LTS, some bug fixes, also some bug fixes in Ember data. And in Ember CLI, we switched from, I think, Phantom.js to Headless Chrome. We added Node 9 to the support matrix to guarantee that it is supported. And we removed cross-domain.xml, which no longer makes much sense with modern browsers. Okay, we're getting closer to current Ember on 2.18. Oh, sorry. On 2.18, it was also mostly bug fixes and preparation for the 3.0 Ember release. Since this was scheduled to be the last 2.x release, we wanted to make sure it was really stable, because it is now an LTS. So when Ember 3 was released, this one was also considered an LTS. And there was a lot of behind-the-scenes preparation in order for some other things in Ember 3.0 to be able to be released. So onwards to Ember 3.0. This was released in February, I think. couple weeks ago. And I found this tweet on the internet from a member of the community, and I think it really describes well what the Ember team wants to achieve. The philosophy of the Ember project is that major releases are garbage collection. What this means is that during Ember 2, we issued deprecations, and all of them have an until. Because of somewhere, semantic versioning, we don't want to break compatibility. So we say, okay, we will support this API until Ember 3.0, but it is deprecated. So please consult our deprecation guides and update your codes accordingly. Sorry. And it really is like the calm before the storm. We have a lot of nice things, even if the major release is kind of boring. It's our goal, is so you can update your app to Ember 3 and not have like a day or two of woes and having to fix stuff. So in Ember 3, we removed support for IE9, IE10, and Phantom. We consider them no longer supported because we consider they don't have enough market share and they were holding the project back in some ways. And Phantom, especially, is itself considered deprecated. We removed support for globals builds and publishing to Bower. We now fully support NPM, Ember and Ember Data, and our add-ons, and that the whole process is based on NPM now. And we also removed any deprecations that were slated for 3.0. I think there was 1 or 2 deprecations that were introduced in the last version, minor versions of 2, but they were considered until 3.4, so people have time. On the Ember data side, we removed the window.ds global. Now you have to import from the package, and we also removed deprecations. In Ember CLI, we removed base URL support, which was a deprecated API. You should now use root URL. And we removed Procfile.js support, and you should now use Ember CLI build. Most people and most projects are already using Ember CLI build. Broccoli is from about 2 or 3 years ago, one of the very first versions of Ember CLI, but we decided to support. And speaking of support, like I said, we want to make sure that people can upgrade very, very easily and don't have problems. So to support those people that are still using some features of Ember and they can't easily upgrade, what we have done is extract those features into an add-on called Ember 2 Legacy. And the features that are in that add-on will be supported until 3.4, which is the first LTS of the 3 series. This is similar to something that we have done in the past. For Ember 2, we had some add-ons to support some deprecated features like controllers and views, if I'm remembering correctly. Okay, so here's the release blog post. So onwards to Ember 3.1, which is upcoming. It's going to be released towards the end of the month, 20-something. I don't remember the exact date, but it's in the schedule. And as you can see, oops, I forgot to remove the legacy thing from previous slide, sorry. But as you can see, there are a bunch more new features. We have something that the community was really enthused about, which was the ES5 getters for computed properties. So in Ember, previously, you always had to use this.get or Ember.get to fetch properties because of the Ember objects model. But now you can use this dot and the property directly, like this.foo or this.bar, and it's going to work. There are a couple edge cases which are related to proxying objects, which we use in Ember data. But since we have to support Internet Explorer 11, we don't use the native proxy. So there's some weirdness there. And then we have, optional features. This was the way that the Ember project had to introduce features which are breaking, but we still wanted people to be able to experiment with them. The first is the application template wrapper. Currently, whenever you mount an Ember app in your website, you have a wrapper div with an Ember view tag, and some projects don't want that because it breaks their CSS. So if you opt into this feature, you don't have any div tags surrounding your application. And the two next ones start going into Glimmer-inspired stuff. I'll talk about Glimmer a little bit at the end, but last year we launched a new project which was Glimmer.js, which is a component library. And we used Glimmer.js as an experimentation ground. And now we're starting to bring some of the features that we discovered and invented in Glimmer.js into Ember. So the first one is template-only Glimmer components. What that means is that while Ember components have a semantic of also adding a wrapper div to every component, and you manage the classes and the attributes in the JavaScript. Now, with the template-only Glimmer components optional feature, there's no wrapper. Basically, when we invoke a component, that invocation is replaced with the actual template. There's no wrapper. So this enables you to manage the classes and the attributes in the templates and bind like you would instead of doing everything in the JavaScript. The second one is template component arguments, which is that @name. This is going to allow users of Ember to distinguish between properties in the templates that are from the component and arguments that are passed into the component. So @name is saying this name is an argument that's passed into the component. If it were just curly curly name curly curly, that would mean that it's a property of the component itself. Okay, so here's the blog post, and I've put the blog posts because they are really the best way to keep up to date with releases and the comings and goings of Ember. You can see that we have releases and recent posts. In recent posts, we have some interesting stuff like the survey, Glimmer.js progress reports, and Road to Ember 3.0, which was a prose blog post that we released explaining the thought process between picking this timeline. Okay. Now I'm going to dive into RFCs. Some of these are already implemented and available, like optional features, and some of these are still upcoming. RFCs mean requests for comments, and this is a process that Ember has for introducing new features and deprecations into the framework. Someone, either from the core teams or from the community, writes up a document and posts it to this repository, and then the community discusses that proposal. It's a bit like TC39, and React recently also decided to use an RFC process for themselves. So you might be familiar by now. First, I'm going to start with the deprecations RFC. There's a bunch of deprecation RFCs here, and this is because with Ember 3.0, our goal as a core team is to remove as much craft as possible, to modernize the code base, and to be able to break it apart and use the subset that you need. So streamline, streamline, streamline. That's why we're wanting to deprecate function.prototype extensions. So currently you can do function.on or function.property or function.observes, and that works. Ember developers will know better what I'm talking about. The idea is to move away from that and move towards imported functions. We have an Ember logger in Ember. This was for legacy support, especially IE9, because in IE9, the console doesn't exist if you don't have the developer tools open. So your code would error out. But now we don't support that browser anymore, so we want to move towards the console. So use the platform, as they say. We have the application wrapper, which I've already mentioned before as an optional feature. We want to deprecate component lifecycle events. This seems a bit harsh, but we have events through the Ember evented system, and then we have method hooks. Method hooks are methods in the component class that you overwrite you overwrite those methods, and those methods are called by the framework at certain times. So didn't insert element is called on the component by the framework when the component is inserted. So since we had both of them, there was some confusion, and events have, since they're asynchronous, they have some weird timing issues. So just override did insert element or did render, call super, everything works great. Sorry, oops, I have some editing problems with my slides. So property fallback is not what's below here. Property fallback is when you do this curly name. This tries to search a bunch of things. The idea is that when you want a name to be a property of the component, you have to specify this.name. So basically like JavaScript. We want to make it more similar to JavaScript, essentially. So I have the asterisks in a couple of RFCs because these RFCs were not proposed by the core team, but from members of the community. And Ember logger specifically is already in FCP, which means final comment period. So it's bound to be merged. And this was one of the first contributions from the author to the Ember ecosystem. So you really do have a lot of power to influence the future of Ember. Okay, so a couple more RFCs. Named arguments. So I've already mentioned this. The idea is that the @name means that it's a property, it's an argument passed into the component. Template all in components, I also mentioned. Remove application wrapper, I've also mentioned this. ES5 getters, I've also mentioned this before in the 3.1 release. Let templates helper. So this allows you to bind a value and give it a name. for that scope. So inside the let block, the hashtag, let's call it that, the hashtag denotes a block. So inside of this block, you have access to this name. There's a feature in Ember called with, which is similar. The problem is that with has a conditional behavior. So if you pass false as the first argument to with, it doesn't render the content, and let always renders the content. So we have deprecated with and implemented let in order to avoid that confusion. And then we have another RFC from a community member, optional jQuery. Internally, Ember doesn't really rely on jQuery apart from the DOM event system, like the DOM listeners. But you have been able for a while to remove jQuery from your project. But it wasn't an easy thing to do. This RFC basically lays out the path to not use jQuery at all internally and make it optional and make that process be as simple as possible, because jQuery is still a big dependency and you might be size constrained and you want to remove that. So some more new features. This also goes in the direction of paring down Ember, streamlining Ember. The first one is splitting Ember into packages. At the moment, you do npm install Ember source, and you get a lot of things, and it's the full framework. You cannot avoid using some parts of the framework at all. Our idea is to have at Ember core, and this will start out with all of the pieces, but then as we move along, the idea is to extract packages and they become optional. So if you really want to, you can just use Ember/core, and that will provide you a minimal subset of features of Ember, and then you can add the features back in. But this is still in FCP, I believe, but it's something that the community and the core team feels strongly about. Then we have Ember Data model data. Ember Data is our data management solution, and they want to introduce an abstraction between the internals and the public API, so that add-on developers, there's a lot of adapter and serializer developers for Ember Data, and this will ease implementation and experimentation of a couple of different things, like change tracking for relationships, offline and online syncing, and that sort of thing. Model data is a very versatile base on which to build a lot of APIs. And then we have RFC process update, which is a meta RFC because it pertains to the RFC process itself. Since we've implemented the RFC process, we've noticed some deficiencies, some confusion in the community about how it works, how to process RFCs and all of that. So our intention is that we make it clearer and we make it easier for community members and also the different core teams to manage their own RFCs. So, like I mentioned, I'm from the learning team, so I want to quickly mention a couple of things. The Ember.js.com website is seeing a lot of behind-the-scenes improvements. We are moving some parts of the website to Ember apps. We moved the API docs to an Ember app, and it's live. And now we have search, we have versions, because previously our API docs weren't versioned. And there's a lot of cool stuff happening behind the scenes. If you're interested in contributing to some cool Ember apps that are being pre-rendered, and most of them we're actually shipping just static pages. We're using Ember as a static site generator, if that interests you, or if you want to contribute to content and all of that, come find the learning team. Speaking of the learning team, one thing that I'm quite proud of is Ember.js Times, which is our newsletter. I mentioned this in the previous This.JavaScript, but now we are at our 34th issue, and this week will be the 35th issue. Every week we have been sending out this newsletter. It's usually written by a couple of the members of the learning team, but also with the help of a bunch of contributors. This is the best way to keep track of news. We try to distill that week's happenings and put it in context of where Ember is going. And we have added a new section recently. We've only had it for 2 weeks, which is the readers' questions. And this is an opportunity for readers to ask the core teams questions that they want answered. At the moment, we've had 2 questions. Are there any plans for Ember data to embrace immutability? And what is the status of Ember engines? So tomorrow or Saturday, we will have a new one. If you want to know what it is, subscribe to the newsletter, and you'll get a link in your inbox. Both of these were answered by Dan Gebhardt, but we'll give him a break for the next one. Add-ons and the community. Last time I mentioned Ember CLI TypeScript, so I want to give it a bit of continuity and mention it again. Ember CLI TypeScript is moving ahead at full steam. They now have much improved type checking. So this.get gets you autocompletes and type checks and errors if it doesn't exist. And if you do store.findRecord and you pass in a string that is not a model that exists in your application, it's errors, and there's a bunch of other cool stuff. And this also applies to the inject APIs for controllers and services. They have implemented a really cool thing, which is add-on support. You can author your add-on in TypeScript, and then you publish it to NPM, but you publish it as JavaScript with typedefs. So this means that whoever uses your add-on doesn't have to install TypeScript for themselves, which is a big dependency. So this is really nice because you get most of the benefits, if not all, and you also support the JavaScript side. And they also have added blueprints. So now when you do Ember generate controller, components, route, whatever, model, you get TypeScript files with the proper types. This is the improved type checking. So before you had to do a bit more manual work. You can see the services and the find record. You had to specify some of the types, but now the add-on team for Ember CLI TypeScript really stepped up and improved the situation, which is very nice. We have a new add-on, which is Ember CLI Updates. This allows you to do smart updates to your app. You can specify a from and a to, and it will update your project's dependencies and file structure accordingly, but leave the files that are not part of the starter blueprint, like the Ember new blueprint. Those files will be left alone. It can try to resolve conflicts using Git merge tool for you. And a cool thing that's also only possible with the help of the community is that you can run code mods. And these code mods are our answer to churn, basically, and to help all Ember developers update their codes with minimal effort. You have Ember modules code mods, and a couple of others. You have one for tests, because Ember has a new testing harness, which is much nicer and much cleaner. The ES5 getters that I've mentioned before, and the native DOM helpers that are also related to testing. So quickly about Glimmer.js. Glimmer.js saw the launch of the 0.90 version. It has an async renderer, so you should check out the changelog and the releases for more details on that, but it's quite cool tech. And then we have capital components. Before, you used to do lowercase capital dash component or kebab dash component, like web components. But we decided to go with more of a React style capital components, and this allows us to disambiguate between these components and web components and Ember components, so that's very nice. In terms of upcoming features, there's binary bytecode templates. This is actually working in Glimmer VM, but we have some work to do to upstream this into Glimmer.js and then into Ember. And then we have server-side rendering rehydration. Ember has server-side rendering via fastboot, but it doesn't have rehydration yet. And this is also implemented in Glimmer VM, and then we're going to upstream it to Glimmer.js and Ember, and eventually async renderer and capital components as well. That's our plan, so keep your eyes peeled for more RFCs. Just before Christmas, we had what I called the RFC Advent calendar, because it seemed like every day a new RFC was coming out. So a lot of movement. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. That was awesome. Really great to hear about amazing things happening in Ember. And now I wanted to go ahead and bring Justin back.
All right. Let's try this again. I closed about 100 tabs and rebooted Chrome. So hopefully I've made the memory gods on the computer happy or something like that. So wish me luck. And I won't ignore the notifications this time in case everybody tries to tell me that I got booted. Okay. We looking good on the slides here now? Yes.
Looking good.
Okay, so I think I dropped off somewhere in here where I was saying that 2017 was a great year for web components. So with Safari and Chrome both having native implementations, we have the vast majority of mobile users have native web component support. So that does really great things for the performance and energy efficiency and loading time for apps based on web components for mobile. So also Safari has implemented custom elements in Shadow DOM behind a flag. That should be shipping soon. And the really, really interesting thing that Safari is doing is re-implementing their entire browser UI with web components. So they're migrating away from Zool, which is a HTML-like XML kind of way of declaring applications and UIs, and moving towards using web components directly and HTML. And there are a lot of libraries that have come out both in 2017 and that are coming out this year as well that either directly use web components or let you produce web components, or there's a new trend of compiling to web components. And so that's very exciting. It's very good for interop. I'll get into that a little bit. And this year also, there are a lot of upcoming proposals for new specifications. So a couple of these here are a template instantiation proposal, which lets you create chunks of DOM that have data embedded in them. CSS shadow parts, which lets you style across shadow boundaries and do theming. Scope custom element registries, which lets you avoid global names that you have for custom elements and avoid collisions if you have to use the same name. And HTML modules, which is a proposed replacement for HTML imports. Wanted to talk about two of these real quick that we're quite excited about. The first is template instantiation. So browsers have had a template tag for a little while now. All 4 major browsers have been shipping it. And it's great because templates let you define this inert chunk of DOM that you can efficiently clone. But when most people think about templates and templating in general, they think about being able to embed data into the template. And when you create an instance from the template, the data is embedded in there, and then you can update that. And the template tag hasn't given that to us yet. So template instantiation is a proposal to allow you to define expressions, or mainly the expression delimiters themselves, in the template. And then when you create an instance of this template, you use this new API called create instance, where you're able to provide it data. And the expressions and the data are handed off to what's called a template processor, which is able to interpret the expressions and replace the expressions with DOM derived from the data. And so this also solves kind of in general, like a really big problem that we think we have on the DOM is that so far there's no great way on the DOM to create a large tree of DOM and get references back to the interesting nodes, the nodes that represent dynamic parts in that DOM. And so to a large degree, all frameworks solve this problem in their own way. They either imperatively create trees of DOMs and hold on to references of nodes, or they might clone a template and then do query selector or some kind of tree walking to find the interesting nodes. And so this proposal lets the browser do that for the framework. So the browser can parse and find all the important spots in the DOM in one pass. And so this should be good for efficiency. I have a link to the proposal down here. Next up, we have CSS shadow parts. So Shadow DOM is really great for CSS. It solves a lot of problems with CSS. You get scoping, so you don't have to have conventions like BEM to avoid collisions. You also get encapsulation. So, scoping is encapsulation, but you don't have leaking of styles down from selectors of elements above you in the tree. And it also has some efficiency gains where the browser has to evaluate and invalidate a lot less CSS because you have smaller trees of DOM and smaller style sheets the browser has to look at for each shadow root. But encapsulation has a downside here in that it's hard to style across shadow boundaries. So the CSS shadow parts proposal is a way to, in your shadow root, declare an element has a part name, which will expose that element outside the shadow root so that it can be styled with this new selector here called : part. And there's also one called : theme, which acts across your whole page. And so now you can expose a specific element that you want styled, while the rest of the elements in your shadow root are fully encapsulated and unstylable. So this one, have a URL for that proposal there too. So also in the ecosystem, we have a lot more web components libraries. So we have some that are kind of targeting native web components APIs directly, and obviously Polymer and Skate.js has been around for a while. We have some new ones like Nutmeg that have been coming out. And then we also have kind of a whole new suite of libraries that are either kind of written originally to compile to web components or have added a compilation target of web components to them. So things like Stencil, Svelte has a web component target now, Angular Elements, which was mentioned earlier by Igor, and Vue, which was mentioned by Evan. So this is a really great development here. I think we're finally seeing the interop story of the interop promise of web components come to fruition here. So next, let's talk about what's happened recently in Polymer. So we've released Polymer 2.5. In large part, this is prepping for the Polymer 3.0 automated upgrade release. So we're adding things to 2.5 to make it easier to upgrade to 3.0. This is things like the Polymer HTML template tag that lets you define templates in JavaScript. This is not something you'd necessarily do by default in Polymer 2. But it lets us have kind of a compilation target or a conversion target for Polymer 3. We've also added TypeScript definitions and TypeScript decorators that you can use in Polymer 2.5. And so those are really, really nice. And I wanted to call them out quickly here. So the TypeScript declarations and the decorators let you write Polymer elements as TypeScript classes that use standard JavaScript or soon to be standard JavaScript class properties. And decorators to do things like register your element, define an observable property. Whoops, I have a little typo here. And observe property changes. So now instead of having kind of a proprietary Polymer properties block, you can just use the class properties and decorate methods to get observer changes. I think a lot of libraries are moving towards using decorators in this way, and there seems to be kind of a convergence in style that I think a lot of components are going to look roughly like this. Let's see. Whoa. Okay. Polymer 3.0. So we announced Polymer 3.0 at the Polymer Summit last year. And 3.0 is mainly a migration away from HTML imports and Bower to JavaScript modules and NPM. The main goal of 3.0 is to move a lot closer to the mainstream JavaScript development ecosystem. HTML imports didn't get traction with browsers, and Bower was kind of like a front-end alternative to NPM, which has kind of faded away as NPM has become more popular on the front end. So we're trying to be a lot more compatible overall with the JavaScript ecosystem. With HTML imports, this was a little tougher before Polymer 1 and 2. We want to be able to allow anybody in any framework to import a web component and use it inside of that web component or application. And with modules, this becomes possible because modules have very, very good support across tools currently and increasing support across browsers. Another important aspect here is that this lets us run with absolutely no polyfills on Safari and Chrome, and then very soon Firefox. Again, great for performance and loading performance. And Polymer 3.0 is a 100% automatic translation from Polymer 2.0. We have this new tool called the Modulizer, which does this whole process of checking out your repositories, installing their Bower dependencies, analyzing, doing a static analysis of all the libraries in there and what kind of global namespace references they write, converting all of that into modules, away from HTML into modules, rewriting those global namespace style references into imports and exports, and rewriting and generating a package JSON and installing all your new NPM dependencies and running tests and finally publishing to GitHub. So it's kind of like a one-button translation tool for entire suites of GitHub repos. And so Polymer 3.0 itself and all of our elements are 100% automatically translated from Polymer 2. We don't actually make any changes to our 3.0 branches. If we want to make a change, we make it to Polymer 2 and then run the tool again. And this tool is going to be available to the public so that you can run this on your elements and automatically move to NPM. And along with moving Polymer itself to modules, we're adding module support to our tools. And also in this new Polymer world here, because we're using all these standard technologies, you can bring your own tools like Rollup and Webpack. And it's interesting here that we're kind of going all in on modules. So Polymer 3.0 is actually written in modules and published to NPM as modules. And we're possibly one of the first libraries, I think, to go this far into modules. And so we're trying to iron out all the rough edges that we have with modules. This goes from how do we support older browsers? We have tools that at the application level will compile modules out to whatever support level the application needs, depending on its browser support targets. And we're also trying to work together with standards and Node and other tools vendors to try to even out the module support and how you would write modules across the web and Node. So our goal here is to be able to enable people to write modules that run in both Node and the browser without any transformation or tooling necessary. So we're looking to release 3.0 very, very soon. Keep your eyes peeled for this. We think it's going to be a huge release for Polymer because it does bridge what used to be this big gap between kind of the Bower world and the NPM world. And we hope a lot more people will be able to use it. Next, I wanted to talk about this new library we've been working on recently called lit.html. So lit.html is a very small and focused library that focuses just on rendering and updating DOM. So you define a template in JavaScript using template literals, and the expressions are just template literal expressions embedded inside of them. It's all standard JavaScript. And so this was kind of created in a response to the fact that we were moving from Polymer templates living in HTML files to living in JavaScript modules. And once we made that move, having our expressions and our templates just be strings inside of the templates was kind of unsatisfying, especially since they're a custom syntax. So we tried to figure out a way to move the expressions into native JavaScript. So this required a few changes in how we approach templates. They kind of went from static template declarations to being instance methods that are kind of reevaluated every time data changes. And so in some ways, this is a little bit like JSX. It lends itself to functional style programming where you're just returning a description of the UI. And evaluating a template produces JavaScript values that can be composed and manipulated as values, much in the same way that JSX can. But this is all just standard JavaScript. So there's no required build step. There's no syntax extensions to JavaScript here. And we're not doing any VDOM diffing at all. Only the parts that can change are ever processed when updates occur. And only the parts that do change are ever forwarded and written to the DOM. So we don't have to walk entire trees of DOM to find out what to change. And so we're getting some really nice efficiency gains out of this library. So we're starting to use this in various Polymer and Google projects. The last few things we need to do before we publish this out is get IE11 support integrated, and then we'll be publishing a 1.0 pretty soon. HTML is also very extensible via directives, so a lot of features that you might see in other libraries, we have available, or it's possible to write as add-ons that you can just wrap around your expressions and get custom behavior. And I'm getting some notices here. I apologize for the white on yellow text. It's relatively high contrast on my screen, so if I post the slides, I'll change this to be easier to read. Yeah, and HTML is also pretty expressive in terms of what types of values it supports. So you can embed text as you would expect, but you can also embed DOM nodes, promises, async iterators. So you can do lots of really interesting flexible things with lit templates. Which brings me to a new base class that we are creating for Polymer 3.0 and beyond called lit element. So lit element is basically the combination of the core parts of Polymer, not the templating, but the property tracking with lit HTML. And so you're able to extend lit element, and you just implement this render method here where you return a lit template. And in your expressions, you just reference any data that you want. And the lit element base class takes care of rendering that template to the shadow root that it sets up. And so it's a very kind of functional reactive style way of writing an element here. And we're finding it very, very nice to develop in. And so this is kind of the next generation of Polymer base class that we want people to use once we move to modules in NPM. It's very lightweight, weighs in at about 4.5K, I think, currently. And it's also interesting that the way that the property changes propagate make these elements fully batched in async. So you kind of naturally get some of the aspects of React's upcoming fiber, and that components are rendered async down the tree. Errors are kind of encapsulated at the component boundaries and so on. And finally, we mentioned this at the Polymer Summit, but we're also working on kind of a next generation app toolbox. So this is our kind of end-to-end PWA framework that has some similar goals as other frameworks out there like Next.js or Nuxt.js. So this includes state management. We're currently using Redux for that. And it includes routing and lazy loading, the entire purple pattern. So the prefetch and lazy load a route, and then and then cache it later. We automatically generate the service worker for the pre-caching and the offline support. And it includes responsive layout type of elements like app drawers and app toolbars, and then a number of starter templates that we're working on. So we have Polymer starter kit, we have news and e-commerce templates, and I think we're also working on a blog template there. So that's my quick update of the Polymer ecosystem there. If you want to follow along, we have our website at polymerproject.org, and we've been trying to update the blog more frequently there and give updates on what's happening with Polymer 3. We have some new updates, new blog posts coming out soon, so pay attention to that. And you can follow us at Polymer on Twitter, and then pay attention and look for Polymer 3 coming out really soon. All right.
Thank you so much.
My update.
That was great. Oh my gosh, so many great updates. We are very, very happy to have everybody talk about amazing things. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. So Rachel, our special guest, which we didn't get to hear Rachel talk as much But we're so happy to have you, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining and being a part of this. So Rachel asked one question, and you guys literally one-word answer, and then we'll have to say bye. And you can continue the conversation, of course, on Twitter with at this.media.
All right, sweet. Well, thanks for having me here, and thank you all for coming on and giving us your status updates. I'm sure that the audience is way more excited to hear about this than they are to hear this particular question. But as you know, been really active in the creative coding community. I came into front-end development from design, and I've noticed an interesting change in trends over the past 5 years, where increasingly, when you interview for roles, people want to hear just, like, you are a React developer, or you are an Angular developer. And for web designers, this can be interesting. There's less pressure for designers to know code. We don't really hear the old conversation of should designers learn to code. We're increasingly seeing designers moving over into prototyping tooling spaces for designers who do want to move into more technical roles, but are worried about perhaps investing all in on a single framework. Where is a good place for them to get started? Is there any framework agnostic place they can build up their skills that will translate over into their future employer's framework of choice?
Oh, man.
You had to go there.
I went there.
Short answers. Short answers.
I mean, I'll go first because I think everybody is expecting my answer. The platform has a framework built in, and it's web components, and I think that's getting broad support from all other kinds of frameworks. So I think that's a lasting one. But I would also maybe suggest that employers should not care so much which specific framework people use, hopefully. So.
Cool.
So I'd like to feel this one too. I actually came from a design background also, and I don't know about everyone else here, but I've used Angular 1, Angular 2 and up, React, Ember, messed with Polymer a little bit. Haven't used it in production, but I don't know. It's one of those things where it's probably, if I'm honest, it's probably beneficial for people to learn a framework to get started. Learning the platform is great. It's important. That's where I started because there were no frameworks when I started. But do you have to learn it to get a job? No. You can be a designer and not code at all. But knowledge is power, and having that power enables you to make more money, I would say, honestly. Like, having more skill is definitely going to help you out no matter what the skill is. So which framework would you pick? I don't know. It probably doesn't matter. It's something good to yeah. Well, RxJS isn't really a framework, but it's good to
use the platform and use
pick one. Good to pick one and learn it no matter what it is, whether it's the platform or it's some other framework, and get some expertise in it, then maybe move on and try a different one. But at least you'd have those skills to be able to talk to people about.
Okay, Igor.
One-word answers. You requested one word, and I'm like,
that was such a good
how can I answer this in one word? I don't think that's possible. The way I see this is like there are two ways I would like developers to get engaged in this space, and one is through prototyping that we mentioned. And I think in that case, the underlying technology is not that important if the tooling and how you can use these frameworks or libraries to prototype things, if that's packaged properly, you don't need to know much about the underlying technology. If, for example, there's a drag and drop UI to allow you to prototype UIs and workflows and application flows, then you don't need to know much about what's under the hood. What is interesting to me very much is enabling designers to collaborate with developers, because I think this intersection is the place where we are, or that enables us to build really interesting applications. And the only way to do that is to get designers and developers to work together. And I think the way to do that is to find the happy medium where designers don't feel overwhelmed with the underlying technology, but are able to participate in the iteration cycle with designers, with engineers and developers. And at the same time, if we make the libraries and frameworks simpler enough that designers can use them, that actually benefits the developers as well, because if things are simpler, then everybody benefits.
Well, Franziska, have a...
Well, as a compiler engineer, I'd say learn C++, but I guess that's not helpful here. Don't be intimidated by all these choices, and absolutely nobody knows all the frameworks, and most people, like, I don't even think there is a single person who knows all of Node. It just has so many corners by now. So if you have time, I would really suggest try out more than one, because you learn for the one framework by understanding from the other. Sometimes it just clicks, but just do whichever your friends do, or where you like the community best, or where you find good documentation, or go with Ember because the logo is so cute. Like, try a few and try another one, and don't be overwhelmed and intimidated. There's no right or wrong, and they keep changing all the time. So C++ is here to stay.
And you need it to write WebGL shaders in some situations. So.
There's a song, the C++ is here to stay. Sounds like a Grease soundtrack in my mind. But which, by the way, the reason why I got into JavaScript in the first place was because of the Ember logo, no joke. I thought Tomster was so cute. I was like, what is this JavaScript thing? So Ricardo, you're the last person. What's your response?
Yeah, so on top of Tomster, we also have Zoe, which is even cuter. So definitely get on board. So I think on the topic of which framework to choose, basically there's some consensus of where we're headed. There are some small differences between all of the frameworks, but there's possibly more in common. So whichever framework you pick, you will have skills one way or the other. Ember also takes care to try to be as welcoming as possible in the technical sense, in the community sense, and in the sense that, oh, I don't know anything about the web. Here's a complete package already prepackaged, and you can follow our tutorials. Our idea is you can very easily get started with a couple commands, and you have an application running. There were even some ideas to have like an Electron app which manages that sort of thing for you, so you can use a GUI to start apps. But yeah, I basically make everyone else's words mine. Just pick one, focus on it, and then you'll have transferable skills one way or the other.
Well,
sorry. So I was just going to point out one thing I didn't hear yet, is that I think CSS cuts across all of this. And if you're coming from the design side, you could do a lot worse than really learning CSS, especially newer CSS like Grid and Flexbox.
Man, and that would bring me into my other set of questions about how CSS is falling through the cracks as increasingly more and more front-end development is being done in the JavaScript space. But I think we're out of time, so we're just going to have to do this again.
I know. Well, thank you so much. We'll have to. I think we're doing a State of CSS at some point in time. So
maybe I'll get lucky and get to come to that one.
Yes. Okay. So thank you again. Again, we can continue the conversation on Twitter at this.media. Feel free to tweet. My name again is Tracy at Lady Elite on Twitter. So feel free to follow me there and ask questions. We're always happy to help, especially for people who are looking to get into the field. Everyone's happy and nice and everything. So thank you again for joining. See you all next time.
Bye.
Wait.
Bye.
Question: if you do the state of CSS, can everybody be like this?
No, it has to be like this more.
Everybody's half off the screen.
Okay, y'all. See y'all soon. Bye.